Today, there is growing anxiety on the right over the results of a Texas special election that the Wall Street Journal editorial board summed up like this. How does a Republican lose by 14 points in a safe, conservative Texas state Senate seat that President Trump carried by 17 points in 2024? Answer: when there's a voter backlash against the Trump administration. Notably, it's mass deportation debacles. Here's the victor, Democratic Taylor Remnant, a union leader and first-time candidate, talking to MS Now's Joe Scarborough about how he won big in that deep red district.
And a place like Fort Worth, Texas, when you knocked on doors, had people that had voted Republican their whole life decide to vote for you.
To me, it was simple. We had to focus on solutions, not partisan politics. Bringing communities together, that's what it's all about. In Texas, we look out for our neighbors, and that's exactly what we did with this campaign.
Hey guys, Adam is here. So this is happening right now. Texas just shattered the unspoken rule that a Trump endorsement was an automatic win in any Republican primary. Deep red Texas, the state Republicans treated as a bank vault, where MAGA was supposed to be an automatic win button.
Could it be a preview of the midterms? A major upset in Texas as a Democrat wins a special state Senate election by double digits in a district Trump won by a landslide. Welcome to the weekend. I'm Jonathan Capehart along with Eugene Daniels and Jackie Alamany. We begin with a major Democratic upset in a Texas state Senate election runoff. Late last night, Democrat Taylor Remnant was declared the winner over Republican Lee Wamsgans by double digits in the state's deep red 9th district that President Trump won by 17 points in 2024. Remnant is a 33-year-old local union leader and first-time candidate whose race caught outsized attention after he overperformed in November's election, triggering the runoff. Remnant has since received a surge of support from Democratic groups, including the DNC. It's also another loss for President Trump, who posted on Truth Social just before the runoff. Lee Wamsgans, a Republican running for the state Senate in the suburbs of Fort Worth, Texas, will be a great candidate and has my complete and total endorsement.
Primary night happened, and the results, if you looked past the headlines, showed something the Republican Party is going to be explaining for the rest of the year. Let me take you inside the numbers that actually matter. This was the single biggest endorsement blitz Trump has ever run in any state during any primary cycle. Over 130 candidates got his blessing. He put his name and his brand behind more people in Texas than he has ever done anywhere, and the results that came back were not just messy, they were devastating in ways that the spin machine is already trying to hide. Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller. Say that name because it matters.
Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Now to something rarely seen in a statewide race here in Texas. Governor Greg Abbott has endorsed the Republican challenger in the primary for Texas Agriculture Commissioner over incumbent Sid Miller. His name is Nate Sheets of McKinney. I asked Abbott about it earlier this month during a campaign stop in Mansfield.
Your endorsement today of Nate Sheets may have surprised some people over the incumbent Sid Miller for Texas Agriculture Commissioner. Can you talk a little bit about your reasons for that?
Sure. Listen, I've gotten to know Nate. He's a great guy, will do a terrific job, would be a great asset to the state of Texas with the experience that he brings, with the mindset that he brings, and what his vision is for the future of Texas.
This is one of Trump's loudest, most loyal, most visible allies in the entire state. He has been carrying the MAGA flag at every rally, every event, every opportunity for years. Trump endorsed him personally heading into primary night, and Sid Miller lost. Let that sink in. A high-profile statewide official, a Trump loyalist through and through with a Trump endorsement, lost his re-election race in Texas.
Welcome back. So let's discuss what I think is one of the more interesting races, the Republican primary for Texas Agriculture Commissioner, where three-term incumbent Sid Miller is now ousted by a challenger, Nate Sheets, 53 to 47%. And what really changed the game in this race, in my opinion, were two things. One, Governor Abbott endorsed Nate Sheets, and conservatives in the grassroots abandoned Miller and went for Sheets as well. So that's very interesting. That is a big deal for this race.
That is not a footnote. That is not a minor detail. That is the clearest signal from the entire night that something fundamental has shifted in how Republican primary voters are responding to Trump's blessing. And it did not stop there. Two Trump-backed state representatives, Cecil Bell and Stan Kitzman, lost their primaries by decisive margins. Not close races where you could argue about turnout or last-minute swings. Decisive defeats, clear losses. These were candidates who ran as Trump-aligned, who had his endorsement front and center, and they still got beaten by opponents who convinced enough Republican primary voters that the MAGA stamp was not enough. Think about what that means. In deep red Texas, in Republican primaries where the most loyal base voters show up, the Trump endorsement was supposed to be the ultimate closer. And instead, it could not save candidates who had everything they were supposed to need to win. That is a fundamentally different political reality than what we have seen in every election cycle for the past 8 years. Now let me take you to the congressional picture because it gets even worse. Fox 7 Austin broke down the numbers and found that at least 3 Trump-endorsed congressional candidates either lost outright or are seriously at risk of losing. 4 races are heading into runoffs. One of those Trump-endorsed candidates finished in a distant second place. Not a close second where a runoff could go either way. A distant second. In a Republican primary, in Texas, with a Trump endorsement. The Texas Tribune reported that Trump handed out his endorsement generously across more than 130 candidates, and despite that massive deployment of his political brand, the night still produced casualties at every level of the ballot. State legislators, congressional candidates, statewide office holders. The losses and the runoffs are spread across the entire map, and when you deploy that many endorsements and still end up with that many losses and that many forced runoffs, it tells you something specific and alarming about the current value of Trump's blessing. Then there is the Senate race sitting on top of all of it like the biggest flashing warning sign of the whole night. Senator John Cornyn, over 20 years in office, one of the most powerful establishment Republicans in the country, versus Attorney General Ken Paxton, the scandal-surviving MAGA warrior who has built his entire brand around being Trump's most aggressive fighter in Texas. Neither one of them broke 50% on primary night. Both of them are heading into a bruising, record-spending runoff that analysts are already describing as a proxy war between the establishment wing and the MAGA base of the Texas Republican Party. And here is the part that everyone is talking about. Trump, the man who endorsed over 130 other candidates in this same primary cycle, stayed completely neutral in this race, did not pick a side, did not weigh in, just watched both of them fall short of a majority and said absolutely nothing. The New York Times specifically noted that his refusal to pick a side has left both Cornyn and Paxton scrambling for his blessing, heading into the runoff. The Kingmaker sat out the biggest race of the night, and everybody noticed. Let me walk you through 3 specific dimensions of this story, because each one reveals something different and important about what actually happened and why it matters. The first dimension is the actual scoreboard, and what it really tells you when you look past the spin and get into the details of which races Trump won and which ones he lost or struggled in. The second dimension is the Senate race specifically, and what Trump's complete silence in that race says about where his political confidence actually is right now heading into a midterm cycle. And the third dimension is the suburban and competitive district underperformance, and why that is the most consequential warning sign in the entire story for what happens in November. Let me take you through each one carefully. Start with the scoreboard and the spin around it, because this is where a lot of the confusion about what primary night actually meant is going to come from. Fox 7 Austin reported that Trump-endorsed candidates won 24 out of 28 contested U.S. House GOP primaries in Texas. And if you just read that number without looking at anything else, it sounds pretty good. 24 out of 28 is a high win percentage. You could make a case that most politicians would take those odds. But here is the thing you have to understand about that number before you let anyone use it to tell you everything is fine. The vast majority of those 24 wins came in safe, uncompetitive, deeply red districts where any Republican candidate with a functioning campaign was going to win regardless of whether Trump endorsed them or not. Endorsing someone in a district that is already going to vote Republican by 25 or 30 points is not a demonstration of endorsement power. It is just geography. The district was going red anyway. The real test of whether the endorsement actually moves votes and closes races is what happens in the contested, competitive, genuinely uncertain races. And that is exactly where the losses and the runoffs and the underperformance showed up on primary night. The gap between the safe seat wins and the competitive race struggles is the whole story. You cannot let the top line win number hide it. Sid Miller is the single clearest and most damaging example from the entire night. This is not some random down-ballot candidate nobody has heard of. Sid Miller is the Texas Agriculture Commissioner. He has been one of the most visible and most vocal MAGA voices in the state for years. He shows up at Trump events. He is loud and loyal and consistent about carrying the brand. And Trump gave him an endorsement heading into the primary, a real public late endorsement meant to give his campaign a boost. And Miller still lost. The endorsement came. It was real. It was visible. It was attached to one of Trump's most loyal Texas allies. And it did not save him. That is the most concrete and specific result from the entire night that demonstrates the limits of the endorsement in a way that you cannot argue with or spin around. When a high-profile, longtime Trump ally loses a statewide race in Texas after getting the endorsement, that is not background noise. That is the headline. Cecil Bell and Stan Kitzman losing by decisive margins is another layer of exactly the same story. And it matters because it shows the problem is not isolated to one race or one candidate. These are state legislative candidates, which means they are running in smaller, more specific districts where the base of the Republican primary electorate should theoretically be the most loyal and the most responsive to Trump's brand. And they still got beaten clearly. Decisive margins means their opponents convinced enough Republican primary voters that the Trump endorsement was not the determining factor. That is a really specific and really concerning signal because if the endorsement is not locking down votes even in smaller state legislative districts during a primary where the most motivated and most loyal Republican voters are the ones showing up, then the structural problem with the endorsement's power is even deeper than the statewide and congressional losses suggest. This is not one bad night for one candidate. This is a pattern showing up across multiple levels of the ballot in the state that was supposed to be the clearest proof of Trump's unbeatable endorsement power. Now let me get into the Senate race because this deserves its own very careful analysis. John Cornyn and Ken Paxton, two very different kinds of Texas Republicans running in the same primary for the same Senate seat. Cornyn is the establishment veteran. More than 20 years in the Senate, deep relationships in Washington, institutionalist through and through. He has crossed Trump on certain issues over the years, and the MAGA base knows it. Paxton is the MAGA warrior. He survived an impeachment attempt by his own party, which is remarkable in itself. He has built his entire political brand around being aggressive, confrontational, and completely loyal to Trump's agenda. He is the candidate who looks like the obvious MAGA pick from the outside, and Trump endorsed over 130 other candidates in this same primary cycle. So why in the biggest and most visible Senate race in the state did he go completely neutral? That silence is not random. That silence is a decision. And it tells you something important. Here is the first way to read it. Trump looked at both candidates, looked at the risk calculus, and decided that neither one was a safe enough bet to attach the brand to in a high-visibility race heading into a runoff. Cornyn has a 20-year track record that includes moments of breaking with Trump, which makes him a complicated endorsement for the MAGA base. Paxton carries enormous personal and legal baggage from the impeachment saga and his ongoing controversies, which makes him a risky bet in a general election context. So Trump's political operation made a calculation. Stay out. Let both of them come to you afterward. Maximize leverage without taking any risk. And that is exactly what happened. Both Cornyn and Paxton are now out there trying to earn his blessing for the runoff. Trump is sitting on the sidelines holding the endorsement card while two of the most powerful Republicans in Texas scramble for his blessing. That is a shrewd transactional position if you think about it purely in terms of political leverage and self-preservation. But here is the second way to read that exact same silence. A Trump who is fully and genuinely confident in the power of his endorsement does not stay neutral in the biggest race in the biggest state in his most important primary cycle. A kingmaker who knows his name closes deals does not sit on the sidelines when two candidates are splitting the Republican vote and neither one can break 50% on their own. The fact that he held back, the fact that the political calculation involved real caution rather than just picking the MAGA candidate and delivering the win, suggests that somewhere in the back room there was a recognition that the endorsement is not bulletproof anymore. That attaching the brand to the wrong candidate in a race this visible carries real and meaningful downside risk. And that awareness, that caution, that decision to protect the brand by staying out rather than going in is itself a signal that something has changed in how Trump's operation thinks about the value and the limits of the endorsement. That is worth paying serious attention to. Let me bring this all the way home with 4 clear concrete points, because I want you to leave this video with a genuinely complete understanding of what Texas primary night means and why it matters beyond just one state. Point 1. The surface numbers from Texas primary night are being used to hide a much more damaging reality underneath. 24 House primary wins sounds like a strong record until you understand that the vast majority of those wins came in safe, uncompetitive districts that were going Republican regardless of the endorsement. The real test was in the contested competitive races, and that is exactly where the losses and the runoffs showed up. Sid Miller losing as a high-profile statewide Trump ally, Cecil Bell and Stan Kitzman beaten by decisive margins in state legislative races, 3 congressional picks either losing outright or heading into runoffs from weak positions. Those results are spread across multiple levels of the ballot in multiple types of races. That is not one bad night for one candidate in one unusual circumstance. That is a pattern. And the pattern says the endorsement has real and meaningful limits. Even in Texas, the spin after primary night is going to point to the win total and tell you to relax. Do not buy it. Look at which races those wins came from, and look at where the losses and the struggles actually showed up. That is where the real story lives. Trump staying neutral in the Cornyn versus Paxton Senate race is one of the single most revealing political signals of the entire primary season, and it should not get buried under other headlines or dismissed as a one-time exception. This is the biggest and most visible race in the biggest state in the most consequential primary cycle before the midterms. Trump endorsed over 130 other candidates in this same cycle without hesitating, and he could not bring himself to pick a side in this one. Whether you read that as shrewd transactional positioning or as a sign of genuine political caution about the endorsement's power, the result is the same. Both candidates fell short of 50%. Both are heading into a brutal, expensive runoff, and Trump is sitting on the sidelines holding the endorsement card while both of them scramble for his blessing. The leverage is real and he is going to use it. But the fact that he needed to play it that way instead of just walking in, picking the MAGA candidate, and delivering the victory tells you something very specific about where the confidence level actually is inside that political operation right now. The suburban and competitive district underperformance is the most important and most underreported data point from Texas primary night, and it has direct and serious consequences for what happens in November across the whole country. When MAGA-branded candidates underperform among primary voters in competitive districts, that is a flashing warning light for the general election. Primary electorates are the most loyal and most motivated Republican voters in existence. They are the base of the base. They are the people who show up in low-turnout primary elections specifically because they care deeply about the direction of the party. If Trump-branded candidates are underperforming among those voters in competitive districts during a primary, what happens in November when the full general election electorate shows up and independents and soft Republicans and persuadable voters start making decisions based on things other than pure brand loyalty? GOP strategists are already asking exactly that question, and what the Texas data is showing them is not reassuring. Suburban Texas districts that were already trending more competitive are now showing real vulnerability even at the primary level. Houston suburbs, Dallas-Fort Worth-Collar counties, parts of the San Antonio area. These places have been shifting for several cycles, and the Texas primary results suggest that shift is continuing and maybe accelerating. Here's exactly what we need to watch very closely as the Texas story develops through the runoffs and into the November campaign season. The Cornyn-Paxton runoff is the single most important race to monitor coming out of primary night. Whoever Trump endorses in that runoff, and the timing and manner of how he makes that endorsement, tells you a massive amount about whether he is making decisions based on genuine MAGA ideology or purely on self-preservation and brand protection. If he picks Cornyn, the establishment guy with the 20-year record, the hardcore MAGA base is going to have serious questions. If he picks Paxton, he is betting on a candidate carrying real and documented baggage into what could be a competitive general election. And if he stays neutral again in the runoff, which would be a remarkable thing to do, that is its own very loud answer. That is Trump telling you directly that he does not trust the endorsement to deliver cleanly in a race this visible. Watch that decision. Watch when it comes and how it gets framed. It is going to tell you a lot about where this whole thing is headed. Watch the down-ballot runoffs too, because several competitive congressional and state legislative races that ended without a majority on primary night are heading into their own runoffs over the coming weeks. Those races are going to be very revealing follow-up tests of whether the primary night results were a one-night anomaly or the beginning of a real and durable trend. If Trump-endorsed candidates continue to struggle and underperform in those runoffs, the primary night story stops being a single data point and starts being a confirmed pattern. And a confirmed pattern of mega underperformance in deep red Texas is a pattern that changes the entire November calculation for Republicans trying to hold competitive House seats in tougher states and swing districts across the country. So here is the absolute bottom line. Texas was supposed to be the victory lap. Over 130 endorsements, the biggest single-state deployment of Trump's kingmaker brand in the history of his political career. The showpiece proving he still completely dominates the Republican Party from top to bottom. And what primary night actually delivered was a messy, runoff-heavy, loss-punctuated map that the Texas Tribune and the New York Times both read clearly as evidence that the endorsement is not a silver bullet anymore. Sid Miller poised to lose. Bell and Kitzman beaten decisively. 3 congressional picks in serious trouble. The biggest Senate race in the state heading into a brutal runoff with Trump completely on the sidelines. Suburban districts flashing warning signs that are going to make November harder than anyone in the Republican establishment wants to say out loud right now. This is Texas. This is supposed to be the easy part. This is supposed to be where MAGA runs the table without breaking a sweat. And instead, primary night gave the whole country a very clear and very public look at what it means when the endorsement starts losing its magic. If it can bleed here, it can bleed anywhere.